We're live. Hello, hi, 810 News Media family. I am Jameca Patrick, and we are live right now with breaking news. My guest today is Mr. William Cobbs. How are you today, Mr. Cobbs?
I'm great. How are you?
I am good. I am really good. I am really good. So I am so I want to say excited to talk to you today, but the subject that I want to talk to you about is really sort of heavy. It's something that's heavy, that's been heavy on my mind and heavy on the mind of a lot of our viewers, and a lot of conversation that's been floating around the community. And I really reached out to you because on Sunday, we saw that the Detroit Free Press had issued an article. Uh-oh, did we lose him? Did I lose everybody? Oh, there we are. I thought I lost you. Okay, so on Sunday, the Detroit Free Press had on their cover, I believe, an article about a situation that's going on in Flint, with two young boys and who died in the fire, and
Yep.
would like to be a political cover up. I'll just say it like that. And then I saw a post that you made, because of course there are things going on in DC and just all over the country. And I saw a post that you made about that, and you talked about what's happening in New York. You talked about what's happening in DC, and of course, what's happening here locally in Michigan. And so, can you talk about that? Can you talk about that post and why you wrote that post, and just kind of give us some background to that?
Sure, I can do that. Last Friday, I was co-hosting the Charlene Mitchell program on 9:10 a.m. And in the last hour of the show, we were talking about whether or not honesty, integrity, and truth were dead in politics.
Mhm.
And, last weekend was an interesting weekend because a lot of stuff happened. And then on Sunday, I read that article, and it really got me to the point where I needed to say something about the state of politics, not just locally, but nationally in this country, and why people continue to tolerate it. These are things that the people should be rising up and saying, enough. We don't need this anymore.
Mhm.
When you have a person like the fire chief who is basically undermined about his decision as to how the two firefighters should be dealt with or reprimanded, and that's completely uh, you know blown to the wind because it happens to be an election season. That's wrong. That's
Mhm.
wrong. And more of us have got to be willing to speak up and say something about it so that people recognize that they really do have an opportunity to make a difference.
Mhm.
But they can only do that if they're prepared to step out of the dark and make their voice one of a million different voices. Because
Mhm.
no one person can do it by themselves. But if we come together and we function as a community, we can
Mhm.
get stuff done.
Mhm. Absolutely. And you're right. It just, and like you said, there's like so many things happening at the same time. Because we're talking about classified documents being left where they aren't supposed to be. We're talking about political folks, people in politics who sit in these seats who are lying on resumes.
Mhm.
We're talking about, cover up after cover up. And so it makes you think about what role, like you said, we all need to be rising up, and everybody needs to have a collective voice to address these things. But I've talked to people, particularly in Flint, who said they didn't even know what was happening with the Mitchell kids and the fire chief, and what was happening. So I started looking, and what I realized is our mainstream media isn't always covering what needs to be covered. And I don't want to say that the media is playing crooked politics, but there's definitely a slant on what's being
Well,
covered. What's
the media is playing money politics. You know, if a story doesn't generate, a lot of interest for them, and it doesn't result in a lot of commercial selling for them, they're not interested in it. Doesn't matter how important it is to the people. You know, unfortunately, mainstream journalism in this country has become more of a money making enterprise than it is about a news delivery enterprise. And because of that, people don't always get the exposure that they need to the real story. You know, one of the things that was really amazing to me last year during the election season in Flint is that you had two Democratic candidates and there was no debate.
Right.
There was no debate. You know, and you know, while I am a registered Democrat, I don't give the Democrats any slack. Because if in fact your goal is to present the best candidate to the people, then you got to be willing to do the right thing.
Right.
And I know for a fact that the Michigan Democratic Party discourages debates when it may expose a candidate's weaknesses. And people deserve to know about candidate weaknesses because when they get into the polls, they want to make intelligent, informed decisions, not be making decisions based upon name recognition or the fact that somebody can afford to do a lot of commercials and all that stuff. That doesn't tell them anything about how they're going to do the job.
Right. 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 And so we end up with candidates who can, like you say, ride on their name or buy an election based on commercials and things like that. And you're right, as voters, we deserve to know who our candidates are, what they stand for, what they've done, their records and things like that. And it's really frustrating. And so like you said, here in Flint, we had an election cycle where we had two mayoral candidates who there was no debate. And we had a state rep election, and our state rep had I think the second highest number of missed votes in the state. But people didn't know that because that's not the type of information people are getting. They're getting the warm and fluffy, look at my picture smiling on a postcard or on the TV screen. And it's so we're having these situations where we're getting frustrated, and people don't know what to do. They don't know what to do.
Well, now I'm gonna step out on a limb right now, and I'm gonna make some people mad, but that's okay. I don't care if you get mad at me, because I don't expect everybody to agree with me 100% of the time. But when you have a situation where a candidate for mayor gets caught lying about their credentials and claiming credentials that they don't have, the to be fully informed about this and understand the implications. Because, my father used to always say, if you tell a little lie, you'll tell a big lie. And the fact that the story came out in Flint about the mayor claiming that he had a degree and that he had done this and he had done that, and just wasn't true.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't any different than what this guy in New York did. You know, this guy lied up and down about having a degree from Baruch College, having worked in the financial markets, and it's just fabrication.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if somebody goes out to get a job and they do that, the minute HR finds out about it, they're out of there. But in the public sector, you know, if the people make the mistake of letting somebody like that in, they're stuck with them for the term that they're in office, and unless they're successful in mounting a recall campaign, and doing a recall campaign in Michigan is like pulling teeth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And and I was really frustrated about that. I was I was I was really frustrated about that. I'm getting a note that said, can I ask you to repeat what you just said, the beginning part, when you were talking about the lying about the degree, what happened in Flint?
Well, nothing happened. People acted like it didn't. It was no big deal. And
Right.
and
The
and and
mayor
for
got
me,
caught lying about having a degree, and people acted like it wasn't a big deal.
and for me, I heard people say, well, having a degree isn't important, or it wasn't one of the requirements. True, but what is important is that you can trust in the integrity of the
Mm-hmm.
person holding the office.
Mm-hmm.
And if they put their integrity in question, then the people have a right to question it. And by the way, the reason I have this mask on, it's so nobody thinks that I'm trying to hide my identity or anything like that. I'm at the hospital right now getting an infusion. So
Okay.
so that's why I'm wearing a mask. Otherwise, I wouldn't be covering my face.
And I really appreciate you coming on, especially while you're at the hospital getting an infusion. That to me, that's because you could have said, nope, I can't, I don't have time. So
Well,
I really appreciate that.
this is important for me,
Mhm.
because I I live in Detroit. Well, I live outside of Detroit, and when I was running for governor, Shreve Anandar was also a candidate for governor. Now, at the time, Shreve Anandar lived in Ann Arbor, but once the gubernatorial election was over, he moved to Detroit because he figured out that all you had to do to get people to vote in Detroit was offer free chicken dinners and a soda pop, and people would come out and then they'd vote for you. And the thing about Shreve Anandar is this guy has absolutely nothing going for him upstairs. But now he's going to be representing the people of Detroit from the 13th congressional district for the next 2 years. And frankly, he's about as qualified to do it as my grandchild is. And so I think that we've got to do something to light a fire under people to make sure that they're asking for more. They're
Mm-hmm.
not just being satisfied with whatever is set in front of them.
Right, because we're in trouble. Like Michiganders, we're in trouble at this point. Um, because you're right. If I apply for a job or you apply for a job and HR went to verify our credentials and found out that we had lied about anything,
Right.
about anything on our
That's the
resume,
that's the end of it.
let alone having a degree. Yeah, that's it that day. And so, I mean, I'm of the mind that our elected officials should not be held to the same standard as us, but they should be held to a higher standard. And
No question about it. No question about it. You know, it's absolutely ludicrous that we are satisfied with people who only want the job because of what it pays
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that it exposes them to opportunities to line their pockets.
Mm-hmm.
We got to get past this nonsense of selecting people who want to go to Lansing or who want to go to Washington to serve themselves, not to serve their constituency.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That name recognition. They don't have to show up for debates. They don't have to show up in the community. They can pop in and out every now and then and don't even do the job, but we're study bubbling their name in every
Yeah,
time we see it.
yeah, yeah. It doesn't make sense.
It does not. It does not. And what happens is situations like what's happening in Flint right now, where you have things that occur like with the Mitchell boys and people not being held accountable and people covering it up and people, you know, all of these things that are happening. And in the meantime, we're frustrated because it's happening, but we're also allowing it to happen because we're not using our voices in the way that we should use our voices. And like you said, this is happening in Michigan, in New York, in DC, and it should not be happening. Um,
Jamaica, let me share something with you about
okay.
Flint that people may not know. In the next 10 or 15 years, Flint could be humming like it was 40 years ago.
I'm
And and the only thing that's stopping it is not having a plan. You know, one of the issues I take with Gretchen Whitmer is that when we were campaigning for governor, Gretchen said that if she became the next governor, that all the Flint water issues would be solved immediately.
I
Well,
remember that.
well, it's 5 years later, and it still ain't solved. And people just voted her back in for another term. It's like, damn, how many times does somebody have to lie to you before you figure out what's real and what's not real? You know,
Mm-hmm.
uh, in this last mayoral election, you know, from my perspective, people should have been looking for somebody who had a real economic development plan for 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 making Flint the hub for business opportunities. And they should have been looking for people who were going to do things about developing housing in the community. Because one thing that's got to happen if Flint is to reach its full potential is there's got to be new single family built homes at an affordable cost.
Mm-hmm.
And if a mayor isn't talking about that, isn't helping to put together a plan for that, then they're the wrong person for the job. Because, in 10 or 15 years, you're going to see Michigan's population explode to the point where Flint's 80,000 people today could realistically be 250,000 people in the next 10 years. You know, but they won't come there if there's nothing there for them. If if
Right.
if everything is designed for people who don't need it, you know, um, I periodically will be in Flint. I'll drive around and I'll drive through neighborhoods, and it's heartbreaking that there's as much open land there as there is, and no one's doing anything to develop it.
Right. And I so for transparency, during the last mayoral election, I worked on the Weaver campaign, and so I was privy to like economic development plans and all of these plans. And I think I was what frustrated me, and this is going back to the media, is that she didn't get the exposure. The funny part is the moment the election was before she announced and after she announced, they're calling for everything. And I know this because they call me. And they're calling for everything. Every time a tree branch falls, they want to know her thoughts. But during the election, there wasn't that exposure. And then the whole debacle with the debate that she wanted to debate and the other candidate did not want to debate. And so I felt like the media played a part in not helping the voters make an informed decision,
No
among
question.
other things. And then at the same time, um, with people not making those informed decisions, it's like, they aren't paying attention to promises that were made during 2019 and 2018 and those campaign seasons. Like, I feel like when you run for reelection, it should be like your evaluation at your job. Okay, we talked about this. You said you would do that. Check, you did it. Or
Right.
no, explain to me what happened that it didn't occur.
Like a report card.
Mhm,
Like when your kid brings up their report card. They told you they were going to do this, and then you see C's and D's that they
mhm,
didn't do what they were supposed to do. You
mhm,
know, and the one thing I'll say is that Karen was too nice. She was too magnanimous and didn't, go after Sheldon the way he went after her. Because from my perspective, you know, uh, if Sheldon didn't want to debate, what 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 I would have had her do is put a chair on the stage with his name on it, and I would have answered questions, and then I would have said, turned to the empty chair, and I would have said, "What do you think, Mr. Mayor?" You know, so people understood that the reason there wasn't a real debate is not because she didn't want to have one; it's because he was afraid to have
mhm, mhm. Well, and then so what are you, to go back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier about the lying? What are your thoughts around? Because I do know that you ran for governor, and I do know that, so you have, um, I guess, more of an in-depth understanding of politics and how they go versus how they should go. What do you think about? Do you think candidates or elected officials should automatically be terminated, or how should that process work?
Unfortunately, the electoral process doesn't let you kick somebody out of office because they lied. Now, the vehicle that you do have is that after they've been in office for a year, you can launch a recall campaign against them, you
Mhm.
know, and try and get them out that way. But we have a very interesting election process that does not really hold people accountable for what they say to get the job. You know, it
Mhm.
lets them say anything, but they don't have to live up to it once they get the job.
I agree. I agree, and it's extremely frustrating. This election was frustrating because there were a lot of young people who went out. They were first time voters, and they were frustrated. They didn't understand what happened. They didn't under. We had all kind of debacle. The election results. Nobody could answer questions like the way the results were coming in. There was a lot of issues with the canvassing and the canvassers, and we're seeing that. We're seeing that other places, and people are just frustrated with the process. People were frustrated with the process.
So,
Um,
so one thing I would encourage folks to do: the Michigan Democratic Party convention is coming up in February. Go, go, and make your voice heard. Make sure they understand that you expect more from them than what you're seeing today. They're going to be selecting a new chairman for the MDP, you know, and I got to tell you, I'm biased. There's a young lady running for the office. Her name is Cynthia Johnson, and I think Cynthia would be a great person to be the next chairman of the MDP. And I say that because Cynthia went to Lansing as a freshman member of the legislature, and she was about the business of the people. She was about trying to do the right things for the community. And that's what we need: more people who want to go to Lansing or who want to go to Washington because they want to serve their community and not because they're trying to fill their own pockets up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you think our viewers should know about the process, about what's happening, about any of this stuff surrounding how deplorable things are going right now with this untrust with the government at all
Well,
levels?
since you ask, I'm going to tell you that it's a crying shame that, if I recall, less than 25% of the registered voters in Flint came out for the mayoral election.
Mhm.
You know, if you don't vote, if you don't get engaged, you can't cry about what's happening because you let somebody else, you know, discount what you think and say because they were willing to speak up and you weren't. You know,
Mhm.
if 1,000 more people, 1,200 more people showed up at the polls and voted for someone else, we'd be having a different conversation today.
Mhm.
So the most important thing is to make sure that you're encouraging young people to stay engaged with the process. Don't give up because it didn't go the way they wanted it to this time,
Mhm.
and to make sure that they're taking advantage of every opportunity to vote. You don't have to go to the polls. We now have mail-in voting for anybody, regardless of age.
Mhm.
And if you don't want to go stand in line, just do it by mail.
Mhm.
Just do it by mail. But you got to make your voice heard.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you for being a voice. Thank you for expressing your thoughts. Thank you. I mean, I know the young lady, the mom of the Mitchell boys, is happy to see people standing up and saying something about what's happening with her kids and how you know it was politicized because it happened during the campaign year
It
election.
shouldn't have happened.
It
Those
should,
two boys should still be alive.
Mhm.
And when you have misfeasance on the part of government officials, then you got to be willing to point it out, and you got to be willing to put the light on them, because one thing about roaches and one thing about rats, when you walk in the room and you turn on the lights, they run for the dark because they don't want to be exposed.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
we got to expose all these folks that aren't about the business of the people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And we stand with her in asking for justice, full justice for her and her family on behalf of her boys.
Right.
Well, thank you for joining us today. And
Well,
again, we really appreciate your time.
thank you for having me.
All right. Have a great day.
Take care now. Bye.
Bye.